A single freight train in America can haul hundreds of truckloads, crossing a vast private empire that moves nearly 1/3 of all U.S. exports. Yet as freight rail thrives, passenger trains limp along borrowed tracks, their fate shaped by forces most never see. Why does the world's biggest rail system serve cargo so well, but people so poorly? For stories that reveal how our daily lives are shaped by hidden infrastructure, subscribe and let's explore who truly controls America's rails. Stretching more than 140,000 miles, the U.S. freight rail network forms a steel backbone across the continent. This immense web of track reaches every state except Hawaii, linking farms, factories, ports, and cities in a system unrivaled anywhere else in the world. Every day, freight trains roll across these rails, moving goods that account for about 1/3 of all U.S. exports. By ton miles, the measure of weight moved over distance. Freight rail handles nearly 40% of America's long-distance cargo. That is more than 5,000 ton miles per person each year, a figure that dwarfs the output of European and Japanese railroads combined. The scale is hard to overstate. Trains loaded with grain, coal, chemicals, and containers travel thousands of miles without stopping, crossing mountain ranges and prairies, threading through urban centers and rural crossings. No other freight system on Earth matches this reach or volume. Railroads in the United States move more cargo farther and more efficiently than their peers abroad, making the network a vital artery for the national economy. Behind these numbers lies a system designed for bulk movement at continental scale. The network's size and capacity are not just products of geography, but of decades of investment and operational focus. As the story unfolds, the true power of this system becomes clear, not just in its physical footprint, but in its influence over how goods move, who controls the rails, and why passenger trains find themselves on the margins. Union Pacific and BNSF dominate the western half of the country, controlling the vast corridors that stretch from the Pacific Northwest down to Texas and across the Rockies. Their networks span deserts, mountains, and major agricultural regions, linking the West Coast ports to the industrial heartland. In the east, CSX and Norfolk Southern split the territory. CSX runs from the Atlantic seaboard through the deep south and up toward the Midwest, while Norfolk Southern connects the northeast, mid-Atlantic, and much of the southeast, threading through dense urban centers and major manufacturing hubs. Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Kansas City operate the north-south arteries. Canadian National's lines reach from the Canadian border deep into the Midwest and down to the Gulf of Mexico, while Canadian Pacific Kansas City, formed by the 2023 merger of Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern, now links Canada, the central United States, and Mexico with a single continuous route, the only railroad to do so. Decades of mergers and acquisitions have concentrated control into these 6 companies, each with tight command over their regions. The boundaries between them aren't just lines on a map, they determine who sets schedules, who maintains the tracks, and who decides what gets priority. This concentrated ownership gives each carrier enormous influence over the flow of goods and the rules of the rail. Decisions made in a boardroom in Omaha, Jacksonville, or Montreal ripple across entire supply chains. In this world, the geography of the network is inseparable from the power of those who own it. Freight railroads in the United States hold a clear advantage when it comes to ownership and investments. More than 97% of the country's rail lines are privately owned and maintained by freight companies. This control allows them to operate as profit-driven businesses, with every dollar earned feeding directly back into their infrastructure. Each year, the major freight railroads pour between $20 and $25 billion into upgrading their tracks, locomotives, bridges, and signaling systems. These investments are not just routine maintenance. They are strategic moves to improve efficiency, reliability, and competitive edge, all funded from operating profits rather than government subsidies. By contrast, Amtrak, the nation's primary passenger rail provider, owns just about 3% of the rail infrastructure it uses. The vast majority of its routes run on tracks controlled by freight companies. For the privilege of running passenger trains on these lines, Amtrak pays host railroads more than $100 million annually in access fees. This arrangement leaves Amtrak dependent on the priorities and schedules of the freight carriers, with little say over track maintenance or upgrades. Unlike their freight counterparts, Amtrak cannot count on reinvested profits to modernize its network. Instead, it relies on government appropriations, which fluctuate year to year and are often stretched thin. The result is a sharp divergence in incentives. Freight railroads are motivated to keep their infrastructure in peak condition, knowing that every improvement can boost profits and market share. Passenger rail, on the other hand, operates within the constraints of public funding and limited control, making long-term investment and innovation far more difficult. This fundamental split in ownership and financial flow shapes the daily reality of American rail, setting the stage for how each system responds to changing demands and challenges. Freight trains in America run on the logic of bulk and distance, shaped by the land and the flow of goods, grain from the Midwest, coal from the Powder River Basin, chemicals from the Gulf Coast, and finished automobiles from Detroit all travel by rail, moving in enormous quantities that would overwhelm any other mode of transport. The network's true engine is intermodal freight, containers that shift seamlessly from ship to train to truck. Nowhere is this more visible than at the twin ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Together, they handle about 40% of all U.S. containerized imports by value. Each day, ships unload a tide of containers that are stacked onto trains stretching nearly 2 miles, bound for warehouses and distribution centers across the country. This handoff is the backbone of the global supply chain, with freight rail carrying the middle miles between ocean and inland America. The environmental payoff is just as significant. A single intermodal train can replace 200 trucks on the highway, moving the same amount of cargo with a fraction of the emissions. Rail freight produces only about 1/4 of the carbon output per ton-mile compared to trucking. For shippers, this means lower costs and a smaller environmental footprint. For cities and highways, it means less congestion and cleaner air. The combination of geographic scale, commodity flows, and intermodal efficiency keeps U.S. freight trains full and profitable, even as the world around them changes. On the ground, the relentless drive for efficiency comes with a human cost. Precision-scheduled railroading, now standard across most major freight carriers, has stretched trains to nearly 3 miles in length while cutting thousands of jobs. Rail employment has dropped by more than 20% since 2019, with conductors and maintenance crews bearing the brunt of these reductions. Workers describe longer shifts, fewer breaks, and mounting fatigue as leaner crews are tasked with moving more freight than ever. Security officials in Los Angeles face a different strain. As intermodal traffic surges through the city's rail yards, organized theft rings have exploited gaps left by smaller workforces and longer dwell times. In 2024 alone, over 500 cargo thefts were reported along Los Angeles rail corridors, with losses topping $150 million. The push for profit has made the system more vulnerable, testing the limits of both its workforce and its ability to protect what it carries. Regulators and industry leaders now face a crossroads. At the Surface Transportation Board, debates over reciprocal switching and market competition have drawn intense scrutiny. Shippers argue that opening more interchange points would break the grip of the largest railroads, while freight carriers warn that such measures could disrupt efficiency and threaten the billions they invest each year. Meanwhile, the advance of automation is reshaping the horizon. Major railroads are piloting new technologies, from remote-controlled locomotives in switching yards to advanced scheduling systems powered by artificial intelligence. These trials aim to cut costs and improve reliability, but they also raise questions about safety, workforce stability, and the pace of change. Economists forecast that United States freight volumes could rise sharply by mid-century, driven by population growth, trade, and the demands of e-commerce. The choices made in boardrooms and regulatory hearings today will shape whether freight rail remains the backbone of American commerce or cedes ground to new competitors. As U.S. freight rail quietly shoulders 40% of long-distance cargo, its private investment shapes the backbone of the economy, while passenger trains remain stalled by policy choices. The divide is not just history, it is infrastructure policy, deciding who moves and who waits. Thanks for watching. Join the conversation below.